I was 13, and my parents' crumbling marriage was the soundtrack to my life. The constant, hushed arguments and the heavy silence that followed them made our house feel less like a home and more like a waiting room for a disaster. My only escape was my art. I'd spend hours in my room sketching, losing myself in charcoal and graphite. The local Dollar Tree, a sprawling, chaotic emporium of cheap goods, was my sanctuary. It was just a short bike ride away, a place where the few dollars I earned from odd jobs could be transformed into a treasure trove of art supplies. The store itself was a character, with its flickering fluorescent lights, perpetually sticky floors, and the strange plastic and cardboard smell that clung to everything. I knew its layout by heart, a familiar map that offered a temporary reprieve from the turmoil at home. But one sweltering summer afternoon, that familiar haven had become the setting for an encounter that would warp my sense of safety forever. A terrifying lesson that true monsters don't always hide in the dark. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the store was nearly empty. A blessing for a kid who just wanted to browse the craft aisle in peace. I was examining a set of acrylic paints when I became aware of a presence behind me. I assumed it was just another shopper and didn't think much of it until the silence stretched on for too long. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a man standing a few feet away, dressed in a ridiculous, cheap-looking Jack Sparrow costume. It wasn't Halloween. He was just there. He was swaying slightly, and a wave of stale whiskey and sweat washed over me. "That's a mighty fine treasure you've got there, lass," he slurred, his eyes, barely visible under the matted wig, fixed on the paints in my hand. I gave a nervous laugh, thinking he was just some drunk trying to be funny, a harmless eccentric in a world that was already feeling increasingly strange and unpredictable.
I mumbled a thank you and tried to move away, but he mirrored my movement, blocking my path down the narrow aisle. "A true artist, are we?" he continued, his voice a low, greasy drawl. "Captain Jack has an eye for talent." His proximity was suffocating, and the smell of him was making my stomach turn. I tried to sidestep him again, but he leaned in closer, his breath hot and foul. "I'm the real Jack Sparrow, you know," he whispered, as if sharing a profound secret. It was then that the amusement curdled into real fear. This wasn't just a drunk being weird. There was a predatory intensity in his gaze, a focus that was entirely on me. The empty store, once a comfort, now felt vast and isolating. The lone cashier at the front seemed miles away, and a cold, prickling fear began to creep up my spine, whispering that I was in real danger. "I have to go," I said, my voice barely a squeak. I ducked under his arm and hurried away, my heart pounding. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear his shuffling footsteps following me. I abandoned my shopping and headed straight for the exit, praying he would lose interest. As I pushed through the doors and into the blinding afternoon sun, I felt a moment of relief. I ran to the corner of the building where I had left my bike, my hands fumbling with the lock. I finally got it free and was about to jump on when a shadow fell over me. It was him. He was standing right there, his fake smile looking more like a predatory grimace in the harsh daylight. The parking lot was a sea of shimmering heat waves and empty spaces. There was no one around to help, no one to witness what was about to happen.
I pedaled the rest of the way home in a blur of adrenaline and terror, bursting through my front door and collapsing in a heap on the floor, gasping for air. My mom, startled by my frantic entrance, rushed over. I tried to explain what had happened, the words tumbling out in a panicked, incoherent stream. The pirate, the chase, the threat. She listened, her face a mixture of concern and disbelief. She called the police, but what could she say? A drunk guy in a costume scared my son? As I expected, they treated it as a prank, a bizarre but ultimately harmless incident. They promised to send a car to patrol the area, but I knew they wouldn't find him. He was a ghost, a random specter of chaos that had appeared in my life and then vanished. The incident was a turning point. The world, which had already seemed unstable due to my parents' divorce, now felt actively hostile. My sanctuary, the Dollar Tree, was tainted. I stopped riding my bike there, afraid I would see him again. Every time I saw someone in a costume, even for a legitimate party or event, a jolt of ice-cold fear would shoot through me. I had nightmares for months, always the same, me pedaling furiously, and the sound of his drunken laughter getting closer and closer, and the scent of stale whiskey filling the air. It was a deeply personal trauma, one that was impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't been there. They saw a joke. I saw a monster that looked at me and decided I was prey.
Years have passed, and I'm an adult now. My parents eventually finalized their divorce, and life moved on. I never saw the man in the Jack Sparrow costume again. Sometimes I wonder if he was even real, or if he was some kind of stress-induced hallucination, a bizarre manifestation of the chaos I was feeling in my own life. But the memory feels too vivid, too real. The fear was certainly real. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Evil doesn't always come in a recognizable shape. Sometimes it wears a silly costume and smells of cheap whiskey. And sometimes the most terrifying threats are the ones that no one else will ever believe, leaving you to carry the horror all by yourself, a silent prisoner of a memory that refuses to fade. I still think about him whenever I pass by that shopping plaza. The Dollar Tree is still there, its cheap, colorful signs a beacon of normalcy. But for me, it will always be a place where the veil between the safe, mundane world and a darker, more predatory reality was ripped away. The incident taught me that monsters are real, and they don't always wait for the cover of darkness. Sometimes they are bold enough to hunt you in day-bright light, hiding in plain sight behind a ridiculous mask and a drunken smile, their laughter the last thing you hear as you run for your life, forever changing the way you see the world and the seemingly harmless strangers who inhabit it. The memory serves as a constant, chilling reminder that you are never truly as safe as you think you are, even in the most familiar of places.
My first real job was at a 24-hour grocery store called Harvest Fair. A brightly lit island in an otherwise dark and desolate suburban shopping plaza. I worked the graveyard shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., mostly stocking shelves and running the single open register. For the most part, it was a mind-numbingly boring job. The silence of the long, empty aisles was only broken by the hum of the freezers and the occasional late-night customer stumbling in from milk or antacids. I found a strange comfort in the solitude, a predictable peace that felt safe. I was a 19-year-old college student trying to make tuition, and the quiet hours gave me time to study between the rare rushes of truckers or insomniacs. The store had its own ecosystem of the night, a cast of familiar, harmless characters. But that feeling of safety was a fragile illusion, one that was about to be systematically dismantled by a customer whose routine was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined, proving that even the most mundane places can harbor the deepest of terrors. He first appeared on a Tuesday, exactly at 3:33 a.m. The precision was the first thing that struck me as odd. He was an older man, unnaturally thin, with pale, almost translucent skin that seemed stretched too tightly over his bones. He wore the same thing every time, a dark, old-fashioned suit that was slightly too large for his frame, and a fedora pulled down low, casting his eyes in permanent shadow. He never used a cart or a basket. He would walk in, his steps eerily silent on the linoleum floor, and proceed directly to aisle 4. There, he would pick up a single can of cling peaches. Then he'd go to aisle 7 and select one box of saltine crackers. Finally, he would come to my register, place the 2 items on the counter, and just stare. He never spoke a word, not even a hello. He would just fix his unseen eyes at me from under the brim of his hat as I rang him up, pay with exact change, and leave as silently as he arrived, leaving me with a cold, lingering feeling of unease.
The second time it happened, the following Tuesday at the exact same time, with the exact same items, my unease curdled into a specific, targeted dread. It was no longer a coincidence, it was a pattern. His silence was the most unnerving part. Most of our late-night shoppers were either chatty and lonely or tired and grumpy, but they were all human. This man felt like an automaton, a ghost programmed to perform a single bizarre task. As the weeks went by, his visits became a fixture of my Tuesday nights. I started to watch the clock, my anxiety growing as 3:30 a.m. approached. My manager, a perpetually exhausted man named Dave, just laughed when I mentioned it. "Probably just some old guy with OCD," he'd said, waving it off. "As long as he pays, who cares? You get all sorts of weirdos on the night shift." But his dismissal didn't help. I felt like I was an unwilling participant in some strange, silent ritual, and the peaches and crackers on my counter began to feel ominous offerings. One Tuesday, the pattern broke. He came in at 3:33 a.m. as usual, but this time he didn't go to the aisles. He simply walked to the end of the candy aisle, about 20 feet from my register, and stood there, partially obscured by a display of chewing gum. The store was completely empty except for us. He just stood, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. I could feel his gaze on me, even more intense without the pretense of shopping. I tried to busy myself, wiping down the counter, restocking the cigarettes, anything to avoid looking in his direction. The air grew thick and heavy, and the familiar hum of the freezers now sounded like a low, menacing growl. After 10 minutes of this silent observation, he turned without a sound and walked out, leaving the automatic doors to swish closed behind him, plunging the store back into a silence that now felt profoundly violated and threatening. I was trembling so badly I had to sit down.
The following week, my fear had escalated into outright terror. I almost called in sick, but I needed the money too desperately. I spent the first few hours of my shift jumping at every sound, my eyes constantly darting towards the front doors. At 3:33 a.m., he entered. This time, he walked directly to my counter. He didn't have any items. He just stood there, his face still hidden in shadow. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he must be able to hear it. He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice was a dry, rasping whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "You shouldn't leave your window unlocked, Clara," he rasped. "The one in the kitchen. It's a fire escape, but it's also an invitation." My blood ran cold. My name was Clara, and I always left my small kitchen window cracked open for ventilation. It was a detail no one could possibly know. I stared at him, my mouth agape, unable to form words. How? How could he possibly know my name, let alone the state of a specific window in my second-story apartment, miles away? The friendly, boring grocery store had just transformed into a cage, and the predator was standing right in front of me. He hadn't just been observing me here, he had been following me. He knew where I lived. He had been watching my home. A wave of nausea washed over me as the full, horrifying implication of his words sank in. Every ounce of perceived safety I had ever felt in my life evaporated in that single, terrifying moment. He knew. He had been close enough to see into my kitchen, to watch my private life, and he was now standing here, letting me know that he held all the power. The sterile, bright lights of the store seemed to dim as a primal, suffocating darkness closed in around me.
His shadowed face seemed to twist into what I could only perceive as a smile. He could see the terror in my eyes, and he was savoring it. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled beneath the counter for the silent panic button. I pressed it, praying that it would work, that someone would come. The man didn't flinch. It was as if he knew exactly what I had done. He simply stood there for another moment, letting the silence stretch before he turned with that same unnatural quietness and walked out of the store. I watched his gaunt silhouette disappear into the pre-dawn gloom, my body rigid with a fear so absolute it was paralyzing. I didn't know if he was gone for good or if he was now heading to my apartment, to the unlocked window he had so casually mentioned. The minutes until the police arrived were the longest and most agonizing of my entire life. Of course, when the police finally arrived, he was long gone.
They took my statement, their expressions a mixture of professional concern and thinly veiled skepticism. A creepy customer, a weird comment. It was unsettling, yes, but hardly a crime. They swept the parking lot, found nothing, and advised me to be more careful and to make sure my windows were locked. "We'll keep an eye on the place," one of them said, with a pat on my arm that was meant to be reassuring but felt completely hollow. They left, and I was alone again in the vast, empty store, every shadow now holding a potential threat. The remaining hours of my shift were a blur of pure, undiluted terror. I couldn't stop looking at the doors, expecting him to return at any moment, the whisper of my name still echoing in my ears.
I never went back to that job. I called Dave from my barricaded apartment the next day and quit, giving no real explanation. I moved out a week later, breaking my lease and losing my security deposit without a second thought. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. For months, I would see his thin, suited figure in crowds, on street corners, in the reflection of a shop window. It was never him, of course, just my traumatized mind playing tricks on me. But the fear is real. The knowledge that someone could so easily peel back the layers of your life and expose your deepest vulnerabilities is a horror that stays with you. Sometimes, late at night, I'll walk into my kitchen and find the window slightly ajar, even when I know for a fact that I locked it. And I am reminded that he isn't just a memory. He is a permanent ghost in my life. The most terrifying part is the not knowing. I don't know who he was or what he truly wanted. Was he just a cruel stalker who got his thrill from psychological torment, or was he planning something more? The local police blotter in the following months mentioned a string of unsolved break-ins in my old neighborhood, and one report of a missing college student from a nearby campus that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. I tell myself it's a coincidence, a way from my mind to try and make sense of the senseless, but I can't be sure. All I know is that a simple trip for peaches and crackers could have been my last, and that the quietest places often hide the loudest screams, and some customers you simply never ever forget, no matter how hard you try to erase them from your memory.
Being a single father is a balancing act, a constant tightrope walk between providing for your child and actually being present. My daughter, Lily, was 6 years old, a whirlwind of bright pink dresses and boundless energy, and the absolute center of my world. After a messy divorce, our Saturdays had become sacred. It was our day, a weekly ritual of pancakes, park visits, and, invariably, a trip to the massive Omnimart superstore to stock up on groceries and whatever new sparkly toy had captured her imagination that week. The store was a universe unto itself, a sprawling labyrinth of brightly colored aisles and overwhelming choices. Lily loved it, especially the toy section in aisle 12, which to her was a magical kingdom of dolls and games. I usually found the place exhausting, a necessary chore, but seeing her face light up made it all worthwhile. On this particular Saturday, however, that familiar mundane setting was about to become the stage for a waking nightmare, a chilling encounter that would forever taint our weekend tradition with a layer of deep, predatory fear. We were in aisle 12, the Promised Land. Lily was debating the merits of a princess doll versus a veterinarian playset when a woman approached us. She was elderly, with a kind, wrinkled face and a halo of soft white hair. She reminded me of my own grandmother, exuding an aura of harmless, gentle warmth. "Oh, what a beautiful little girl you have," she cooed, smiling down at Lily. I thanked her, feeling a brief sense of relief. It's always nice when strangers are kind instead of judgmental. Lily, never shy, proudly showed the woman the doll she was holding. The woman listened with attentive rapture, her eyes fixed on my daughter with an intensity that seemed just a little too focused. But I brushed it off. She was just a lonely old woman, I told myself, happy to have a child to talk to. Her kindliness felt like a welcome, gentle breeze in the chaotic storm of the superstore.
We moved on to the cereal aisle, and I was trying to steer Lily away from the sugar-laden boxes when I noticed the same woman at the other end, seemingly examining bags of granola. When she saw us, she smiled again and walked over. "That pink dress would look so pretty with a blue ribbon in your hair, sweetie," she said directly to Lily, completely ignoring me this time. A small, cold prickle of unease ran down my spine. It was a strange coincidence to run into her again in such a massive store, and her comment felt just a little too personal, a little too invasive. I gave her a tight, polite nod and quickly pushed our cart down the aisle, putting some distance between us. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was nothing more than a series of harmless encounters. But a protective instinct was starting to awaken, a quiet alarm bell ringing in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite silence. The paranoia intensified as it kept happening. In the dairy section, she was there, commenting on how strong Lily's bones would be if she drank her milk. By the frozen foods, she remarked that little girls love ice cream after dinner. Her presence was no longer a coincidence. It was deliberate. She was following us. Her once kind smile now seemed fixed and artificial, her eyes never leaving my daughter. My heart began to pound with a low, steady rhythm of fear. I abandoned my shopping list, my only goal now to get Lily out of the store and away from this woman. I grabbed Lily's hand, my grip a little tighter than necessary, and began a brisk walk towards the front registers, trying my best to weave through the crowds and lose her. I didn't look back, afraid of confirming what I already knew, that she would be right there, her grandmotherly facade barely concealing the predatory intent beneath.
We moved on to the cereal aisle, and I was trying to steer Lily away from the sugar-laden boxes when I noticed the same woman at the other end, seemingly examining bags of granola. When she saw us, she smiled again and walked over. "That pink dress would look so pretty with a blue ribbon in your hair, sweetie," she said directly to Lily, completely ignoring me this time. A small, cold prickle of unease ran down my spine.
It was a strange coincidence to run into her again in such a massive store, and her comment felt just a little too personal, a little too invasive. I gave her a tight, polite nod and quickly pushed our cart down the aisle, putting some distance between us. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was nothing more than a series of harmless encounters. But a protective instinct was starting to awaken, a quiet alarm bell ringing in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite silence. The paranoia intensified as it kept happening. In the dairy section, she was there, commenting on how strong Lily's bones would be if she drank her milk. By the frozen foods, she remarked that little girls love ice cream after dinner. Her presence was no longer a coincidence. It was deliberate. She was following us. Her once kind smile now seemed fixed and artificial, her eyes never leaving my daughter. My heart began to pound with a low, steady rhythm of fear. I abandoned my shopping list, my only goal now to get Lily out of the store and away from this woman. I grabbed Lily's hand, my grip a little tighter than necessary, and began a brisk walk towards the front registers, trying my best to weave through the crowds and lose her. I didn't look back, afraid of confirming what I already knew, that she would be right there, her grandmotherly facade barely concealing the predatory intent beneath.
The police never found her. They discovered the van abandoned in an alleyway a few days later. It had been stolen. Life, on the surface, returned to normal, but the incident left a permanent scar. Our Saturday trips to Omnimart stopped. The thought of that place now filled me with a sickening dread. We found a smaller local grocery store to frequent instead. But the terror wasn't confined to the store. About a month after the incident, a small unmarked package arrived at our apartment. Inside was a child's pink dress, the exact same one Lily had been wearing that day in the store. There was no note, no return address, just the dress. The message was clear. She knew where we lived. She hadn't forgotten us. And the most terrifying realization of all was that this wasn't over. It had only just begun. My daughter is 10 now, and she barely remembers the incident, thinking it was just a bad dream she had as a little girl. I've never told her the truth, and I never will. But I see the lingering effects. She has an instinctual fear of overly friendly strangers, a deep-seated caution that I never had to teach her. As for me, I live with a constant low-level hum of anxiety. I installed a state-of-the-art security system in our home, and I never let Lily out of my sight in public. I know I may seem overprotective, but I also know what I saw in that woman's eyes. It was a hunger, a predatory certainty that was ancient and terrifying. I don't know if she was just a deeply disturbed individual or something worse, but I do know she wanted my daughter. And the thought that she is still out there, somewhere, smiling that terrible smile, is a fear that will haunt me for the rest of my life.